Today, we take a look at the 6 worst live TV deaths ever recorded. From an acrobat performing on live television with questionable equipment to a cooking contestant taking a single bite during a televised challenge, which resulted in a moment that left everyone watching completely horrified. It was September 18th, 2013. The brightly lit stage of a late-night variety program stretched 40 feet across, with elevated platforms at varying heights designed to showcase performances. Thick padding surrounded the stage's perimeter, and rigging equipment hung from reinforced ceiling mounts 25 feet above the stage floor. Nina Volkov was 31 years old and had worked professionally as an acrobat and aerialist for 9 years, performing with small touring companies and corporate events throughout Europe. She specialized in trapeze and aerial silk routines, building a reputation for technically clean performances rather than high-risk maneuvers. Booking agents described her as reliable and safety-conscious, someone who inspected equipment carefully and refused performances with inadequate rigging. She had accepted this television appearance after months of reduced bookings, viewing it as exposure that could lead to more consistent work. Aerial performances require rated equipment and redundant safety systems, while professional riggers typically verify load ratings and backup attachments. The variety show relied on a local staging crew with limited experience in human load rigging, as they normally handled lighting and scenic elements. That evening, Nina arrived for rehearsal 6 hours before the live broadcast and immediately noticed concerns with the rigging setup. The primary attachment point used a single carabiner rather than the double clip system she normally required. The rigging crew assured her the equipment was rated for her weight with a significant safety margin, and the show's producer emphasized the tight schedule, urging her to proceed with rehearsal so adjustments could be made if necessary. Nina reluctantly agreed to a limited rehearsal, restricting her movements to low-level positions. The equipment held, and the setup was deemed adequate as broadcast time approached, leaving her concerns unresolved as the studio audience was seated. The live performance began shortly after 8 in the evening. Nina ascended a silk rope to a height of approximately 18 feet, executing a series of wrapped poses while suspended. Audience members and cameras captured her movements as she transitioned into a descent maneuver that placed her full body weight on the silk at maximum extension. The single carabiner failed under the dynamic load. Rather than fracturing, the carabiner rotated under cross-loading, forcing the gate partially open until the attached termination hardware slipped through. Nina dropped suddenly as the rigging connection released. She fell 18 feet along a lateral arc created by the offset rigging point, moving beyond padding designed for vertical falls and striking the stage floor at the edge of the padded zone. The impact occurred in the clear view of cameras and several hundred audience members. Nina landed primarily on her left side, with her shoulder and hip taking most of the initial force, but her head struck the floor surface immediately after. She remained conscious initially, attempting to sit up before losing consciousness approximately 20 seconds after impact. Medical personnel stationed backstage reached her within 40 seconds. Emergency services arrived less than 10 minutes later and transported her to a trauma center. Nina underwent emergency surgery for a subdural hematoma and multiple fractures, but neurological damage was severe. She remained in intensive care for 4 days before life support was withdrawn. The medical examiner determined death resulted from a traumatic brain injury sustained in the fall. The production company faced criminal negligence charges over inadequate safety protocols, while the staging company lost its license and dissolved after civil litigation. Broadcasting rules were later revised to require independent safety inspections for aerial performances, and the program was canceled after 1 additional season. It was March 7th, 2016. The test kitchen of a competitive cooking program was filled with the sounds of sizzling pans running water, and the hum of ventilation systems working to clear smoke and steam. Stainless steel workstations lined the space, each equipped with gas burners, preparation areas, and ingredient storage. Rachel Kimura was 26 years old and worked as a line cook at a mid-tier restaurant, earning barely enough to cover rent in an expensive urban market. She had applied to the cooking competition after encouragement from co-workers who appreciated her creative plating and flavor combinations. Her culinary training consisted of 2 years at a regional cooking school and 4 years of restaurant experience, mostly in high-volume environments that prioritized speed over technique. Friends described her as driven and somewhat anxious, someone who struggled with criticism but desperately wanted recognition for her skills. The show's format placed contestants under extreme time pressure, requiring them to prepare complex dishes within shortened time frames, while judges circulated and offered commentary during a live broadcast elimination round. Medical screening was limited to a basic questionnaire. Rachel disclosed a severe tree nut allergy, and production protocols were in place to exclude those ingredients during her challenges. That afternoon's elimination round required contestants to prepare a dessert within 45 minutes as cameras moved continuously between stations during the live broadcast. The mystery basket included chocolate, fresh berries, cream, and a portion of house-made brittle prepared earlier by the show's culinary prep team as an optional garnish. Production documentation listed pumpkin and sunflower seeds as its components. Production records later showed that a last-minute supplier substitution had introduced finely chopped walnuts. Rachel worked quickly, assembling components while periodically tasting small samples to balance sweetness and texture. Just past the 20-minute mark, she sampled a fragment of the brittle while adjusting her plating plan. Within 90 seconds, cameras captured her slowing her movements and briefly touching her mouth. She remained at her station, continuing preparation as swelling became visible around her lips and eyelids. By the 3-minute mark, Rachel's breathing had become strained, with audible wheezing noticeable even amid kitchen noise. A production assistant monitoring the floor recognized the signs of distress and signaled the on-set medic stationed off-camera. As contestants continued working, Rachel leaned against her workstation for support, her coordination deteriorating as facial swelling progressed. The medic reached her within 30 seconds and immediately identified anaphylaxis. Rachel's personal epinephrine auto-injector was stored in a secured holding area inaccessible during filming, and the on-set medical kit containing injectable epinephrine was kept off the active kitchen floor under standard production protocols. As the medic radioed for emergency services, Rachel's airway continued to swell rapidly. Approximately 6 minutes after ingestion, she collapsed and lost consciousness as cameras cut away from her station. Emergency responders arrived 14 minutes after the reaction began. Epinephrine was administered and advanced airway measures were attempted, but the obstruction had progressed beyond effective reversal. Rachel suffered cardiac arrest during transport and was pronounced dead shortly after arrival at a medical center. The medical examiner later determined the cause of death to be anaphylactic shock, resulting in complete airway obstruction and cardiovascular collapse due to tree nut exposure. In the aftermath, the production company and ingredient supplier faced lawsuits that resulted in settlements and revised safety protocols, including ingredient verification systems and mandatory on-set access to emergency medications for contestants with known allergies. It was November 3rd, 2014. The newsroom of a regional television station operated under the routine chaos of late afternoon, with assignment editors coordinating field crews and producers reviewing scripts for the evening broadcast. In the main studio, lighting technicians finalized adjustments overhead, while camera operators checked framing for the 6 o'clock news block. The low hum of equipment and studio monitors filled the room as countdown clocks ticked toward air. Thomas Brennan was 52 years old and had anchored the evening news for 11 years, a familiar presence to viewers across 3 counties. He had worked in television journalism for nearly 3 decades, progressing through smaller markets before securing the anchor desk. Colleagues described him as reliable and methodical, rarely deviating from routine. Divorced and living alone, Thomas maintained a quiet personal life, staying in intermittent contact with his adult children who lived out of state. Earlier that afternoon, studio staff had reported intermittent flickering from one of the overhead key lights positioned above the anchor desk. The issue was attributed to a loose connector inside the lighting rig, and adjustments were made between rehearsals. The fixture remained powered, suspended roughly 12 feet above the set, its cabling routed along a metal support grid shared by multiple lights. That evening, Thomas arrived on schedule and followed his standard pre-broadcast routine. He reviewed scripts at the anchor desk, confirmed story order with the producer, and adjusted his earpiece while makeup staff completed final touch-ups. As the opening graphics rolled, he took his seat under the studio lights, hands resting on the desk as cameras went live. The broadcast opened normally, with Thomas delivering headlines in a steady tone. Several minutes in, viewers noticed him pause briefly between sentences. Studio footage later showed him shifting slightly in his chair, his right hand tightening against the metal edge of the desk frame. His speech resumed, but words came out unevenly, and he missed a line on the teleprompter. The floor director stepped closer from off-camera. At that moment, Thomas jerked forward, his shoulders tensing as his right hand clenched against the desk edge, unable to release. His hand struck the desk, and he slumped forward, knocking papers aside. The studio feed cut to a commercial break within seconds. Crew members reached him immediately. Thomas was unresponsive, with shallow, irregular breathing and no detectable pulse moments later. The studio's power to the overhead lighting grid was shut down as a precaution while emergency services were contacted. A station security officer initiated CPR until responders arrived. Emergency personnel reached the studio within minutes and continued resuscitation efforts before transporting Thomas to a nearby emergency department. He was pronounced dead later that evening. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be sudden cardiac arrest caused by electrical shock, consistent with exposure to a live current transmitted through energized studio equipment connected to the overhead lighting grid. Subsequent inspection identified internal insulation failure within the overhead lighting fixture. The station issued a brief on-air statement later that night. An independent safety review led to a full replacement of studio lighting systems and mandatory electrical inspections. Thomas's desk remained empty for the remainder of the ratings period, and a small scholarship fund for broadcast journalism students was later established in his name. It was January 19th, 2018. The remote wilderness of northern British Columbia stretched beneath heavy cloud cover, with temperatures hovering near 14 degrees and snow depth reaching nearly 30 inches in exposed areas. Wind moved steadily through the sparse forest, carving drifts around fallen timber and exposed rock. Visibility was reduced as low clouds pressed against the tree line, flattening sound across the terrain. Connor McLeish was 33 years old and worked seasonally as a wilderness guide, leading hiking and camping groups during summer months. During winter, he relied on savings and temporary work. He had been selected to participate in a survival-based television program that placed contestants alone in remote environments with minimal equipment, documenting their experience through continuous self-filming. Connor had legitimate outdoor experience, though most of his professional work involved prepared campsites, moderate weather, and active emergency communication systems. The program's format required contestants to conduct scheduled live satellite check-ins, during which video and audio feeds were transmitted directly to production staff monitoring from a control facility. These check-ins served served both as content and welfare verification. Participants were also required to maintain recorded daily logs between live segments. Extraction protocols allowed producers to intervene if a contestant failed to appear or displayed signs of medical distress. Connor had been deployed to his location for 12 days. Weather conditions during that period were significantly harsher than seasonal averages, with nighttime temperatures dropping below zero and persistent wind interfering with fire maintenance. His food reserves had been exhausted days earlier, and producers later noted visible weight loss and slowing movement during recent broadcasts. That morning, Connor initiated his scheduled live check-in shortly after sunrise. The video feed showed him seated near his shelter entrance, wrapped loosely in layered clothing. A thin layer of frost covered the ground around him, and the surrounding trees stood motionless, muffling sound as the live feed stabilized under weak morning light. His hands shook continuously as he attempted to adjust the camera. Speech was delayed and uneven, with frequent pauses between words. He struggled to maintain eye contact with the lens, repeatedly lowering his head as if losing focus. Producers monitoring the feed noted his slowed responses and asked him to perform basic movement checks required under safety protocol. Connor attempted to stand, but failed to rise fully, collapsing back onto the ground. The camera tipped sideways, capturing him partially in frame as he tried to pull himself upright using a nearby log. Over the next several minutes, his movements became weaker and less coordinated. He crawled toward the shelter opening, pushing the camera out of view as he moved. Audio remained live, capturing labored breathing and intermittent scraping sounds. Attempts by producers to communicate through the satellite link went unanswered. The live feed continued as Connor lay motionless just inside the shelter entrance, visible through the partially collapsed doorway. No further movement was observed. After several minutes without response, producers terminated the broadcast and activated emergency extraction procedures. A helicopter reached the site approximately 6 hours later after weather conditions allowed. Emergency personnel found Connor unresponsive near the shelter entrance with no detectable vital signs. His core body temperature was critically low, and death was confirmed at the scene. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be severe hypothermia, with contributing factors of caloric depletion and physical exhaustion. Review of the live broadcast footage showed progressive motor impairment consistent with advanced cold exposure. The incident prompted an external safety review, resulting in stricter removal thresholds, shorter check-in intervals, and expanded medical authority. The season concluded with a brief memorial card during the final episode's closing credits. It was August 29, 2017. Along the Texas Gulf Coast, the sky had turned an unnatural gray-green as wind gusts bent palm trees nearly horizontal, and storm surge from Hurricane Harvey pushed seawater across coastal highways. Rain fell in sheets so thick that visibility dropped to less than 30 feet in some areas. Marcus Gray was 34 years old and had worked as a meteorologist for a regional news station for 6 years. He specialized in severe weather reporting and had covered tropical systems before, though never one with Harvey's intensity. Colleagues described him as eager and thorough, someone who prepared meticulously for field assignments, but occasionally underestimated rapidly changing conditions. He volunteered for the live coverage assignment, citing his prior experience with severe weather systems. That morning, the production team established a temporary broadcasting position along a seawall approximately 15 feet above normal water levels. The location had been selected earlier in the week when projections showed moderate storm surge potential. By midday, conditions had worsened significantly. Water had already risen to within 3 feet of the seawall's top, and National Weather Service updates warned of catastrophic surge potential in that specific zone. The station's remote producer suggested relocating to higher ground, but Marcus insisted they could maintain the position safely for one more segment, citing the dramatic visual backdrop. Shortly after noon, Marcus began a live report describing wind speeds and rising water. He stood approximately 8 feet from the seawall's edge, with the broadcast van parked behind him as a partial windbreak. The camera operator filmed from inside the vehicle, while a producer monitored from 20 feet away. Waves had begun crashing over the seawall, sending spray across the roadway. During the broadcast, a significantly larger wave struck the concrete barrier. By that point, storm surge had already raised water levels to within a few feet of the seawall's top. Witnesses later described seeing a wall of water surge over the barrier with enough force to carry debris, including sections of wooden dock, metal signage, and chunks of concrete. Marcus attempted to move backward, but the safety line restricted his movement range. The wave hit him directly, knocking him off his feet and dragging him toward the seawall's edge as it receded. He managed to grab a metal railing post, holding on as water rushed around him. The producer began moving toward him, but was forced back by another incoming surge. Marcus maintained his grip for approximately 15 seconds before a second wave, carrying a heavy wooden beam torn from a nearby pier, struck him across the upper back and head. The impact loosened his grip, and the receding water pulled him over the seawall edge into the churning surge below. The camera continued recording as the situation rapidly deteriorated. The remote control room struggled with signal instability caused by the storm, delaying the decision to cut away as emergency assistance was requested on site. Coast Guard dispatch received notification within 2 minutes, but rescue operations were severely limited by the storm's intensity. Search efforts began as conditions allowed, focusing on the area where Marcus had gone into the water. Recovery teams located his body 3 days later, approximately 2 miles down the coast, partially buried in storm debris. The medical examiner determined death resulted from blunt force trauma to the head and chest, with drowning as a contributing factor. Injuries consistent with high-velocity impact suggested the wooden beam had caused severe cranial fractures before he entered the water. The network implemented mandatory evacuation protocols for field crews when storm surge warnings exceeded specific thresholds. Marcus's family established a scholarship fund for aspiring meteorologists at a state university, distributing awards annually to students, emphasizing safety practices in severe weather reporting. It was June 12, 2015. The interior of a converted warehouse in Manchester, England, was lit by overhead studio lights that cast harsh shadows across an obstacle course designed to test physical endurance. Foam padding covered the concrete floor in designated zones, and safety crew members stood at intervals around the perimeter. Jordan Hale was 28 years old and worked as a personal trainer, earning a modest income from clients at a budget gym while pursuing fitness modeling opportunities. He had applied to compete on a physical endurance reality program after seeing audition announcements online. His application video emphasized his athletic background, though most of his training focused on weightlifting and short-duration exercises rather than sustained cardiovascular endurance. Friends described him as competitive and reluctant to show weakness, someone who frequently pushed through pain during workouts despite warning signs. The show's format required contestants to complete increasingly difficult physical challenges, while cameras broadcast live to a studio audience and home viewers. Medical screening prior to filming included basic health questionnaires and blood pressure checks, but no comprehensive cardiac evaluation or stress testing. Jordan had reported no health concerns on his intake forms, omitting a family history of heart disease that had claimed his father at age 46. That evening's challenge involved a timed obstacle course combining rope climbs, heavy carries, and sprint intervals. Jordan began the course moving aggressively, completing the first 3 stations faster than previous contestants. By the 4th station, a 50-yard sprint while carrying 40-pound sandbags, his pace had slowed noticeably. Multiple cameras captured him stumbling slightly, but continuing forward. Approaching the final rope climb, Jordan dropped the sandbags and reached for the rope. He managed to pull himself approximately 6 feet up before his movements became uncoordinated. Witnesses later reported seeing his grip fail and his body go limp before he fell, landing on foam padding below. The fall itself was controlled and non-traumatic, but Jordan remained motionless after impact. A medic stationed nearby reached him within seconds, and immediately began assessment. Jordan was unresponsive with no palpable pulse. The medic initiated CPR while calling for additional medical support. The broadcast cut away from the scene as crew members ushered the audience toward exits. A defibrillator arrived within 3 minutes, and emergency responders from a nearby hospital arrived approximately 12 minutes after the initial collapse. Resuscitation efforts continued for 38 minutes before Jordan was pronounced dead. The post-mortem examination revealed an undiagnosed congenital heart defect, a structural abnormality that had remained asymptomatic until the extreme physical stress of the challenge triggered a fatal cardiac arrhythmia. The medical examiner determined death resulted from sudden cardiac arrest due to previously undetected heart disease. The production company faced immediate legal action from Jordan's family, resulting in an undisclosed settlement and the show's permanent cancellation after 3 aired episodes. Broadcasting regulators implemented enhanced medical screening requirements for all physical competition programs, mandating cardiac evaluation, including electrocardiograms and family history review. The warehouse facility was later converted to a distribution center. Thanks for watching. If you like these stories, click here.